is one that is on. Now we have to hit. Oops. It'll still work. And then live Ryan, Derks, and Jim. Okay. So yeah, we're on. All right, everybody, good morning, good afternoon. We are on quarantine day 1. We're coming to you live from FEMA region number 7 in the heart of Kansas City, Missouri. Jack Cashill and I are making light of a situation where eventually you kind of have to lighten up. There's so much doom and gloom in the news right now, so...
Yeah, it's I will tell you this. I don't watch the news.
Yeah.
I don't even do social media anymore. I run into the news periodically. Like I'll go to pick up a pizza, and this happened to me the other night. And and then I'm staring at the screen. Now I really hadn't looked at the news in a week. And while I'm waiting for my pizza, it says coronavirus deaths in the United States. It says 285.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have thought, based on the hysteria in the air, that there would have been 28,500.
Mm-hmm.
200. I said 285, and then worldwide it was like 15,000 or something.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking something's amiss here. But now I can say this: I'm not running for Congress. Now you are, Ryan. Just tell us a little about why you're running and what district you represent.
So 5th District, I always say Kansas City just because it's the easiest for people to understand, especially even you and I, we follow politics,
Right.
But you see someone's running for Illinois' 9th District. I have no idea what that is.
Right, exactly.
So there's a lot of good people in the eastern counties, but I do say just Kansas City. But it's 5th District. There are so many reasons. A great reason right now is just look at the leadership, the contrast in leadership in Washington, D.C. right now. We have the government just said they're going to increase their debt by maybe 50% is what people are estimating after this is all said and done. You have 80% of the private sector, which is on the brink of bankruptcy, 80% of citizens on the brink of bankruptcy, and Congress cannot put not for one day, can they put just absolute corrupt establishment politics beside and just focus on helping people. I feel like the guy who's currently in that position has just phoned in for the last 15 years and supported anything and everything without putting any protest to his own party. And then you look at the contrast where Donald Trump is our current president. And for my whole life, at least, I've heard many people say, we should really have the government run like a business. And then other people, well, no, that would never work. But we have a businessman running the country doing his best to run it like a business, and it's government, so there's back and forth.
Right.
But I think he's doing a pretty damn good job, all things considered. He's not a perfect man. I'm not a perfect man, but I think he's doing a pretty damn good job. So he really inspired me that he needs a few more good people who want to put the country's interests first rather than just play politics, and I hate it. So that's why I'm running, trying to give Kansas City a win rather than what we've been having.
No, that's an excellent answer. You see I'm wearing my Reagan hat here, so...
Mm-hmm.
I would say Trump has been our best president since Ronald Reagan.
Okay.
I was not a Trump enthusiast during the primary season. Au contraire, just the opposite.
Yeah.
But partly because I didn't know where he was coming from. Who knew? I mean, he was not a politician. He didn't have a track record.
Mm-hmm.
And but what I liked about him was this. And this I wrote a week before he announced. I didn't even know he was announcing. In June 2015, I started an article with the first sentence was this. It said, there's a quote, "The Republican nominee for president will be that candidate who best learns that there is no future in apologizing."
Yeah.
Ever since Ronald Reagan, Republicans, with the exception of a Newt Gingrich blip, have been in apologetic mode. And once you apologize, you lose. Because the left isn't going to be content with an apology. They want you to grovel, and then they want you gone.
Yeah.
And Trump didn't know that. He didn't play by those rules, and so from the first day he comes down the escalator at Trump Tower, the famous descent,
Mm-hmm.
and then he said something about of which, of course, has been fantastically misquoted 1,000 times. About, he goes, and they're sending people over our borders, and they're not the best people, and some of them are criminals, and some of them are rapists, etc. Media firestorm. and the headlines read something like Trump calls all Mexican racist.
Yeah,
You'll
yeah.
see that, or rapist rather. You'll see that.
And they still say it today, even.
They still say it there. Joe Biden says it, at every pit stop if he remembers to say it
Where he
is. And then I thought, okay, that's the end of that candidacy until next day when he refused to apologize. And he still, and I said, maybe we have a candidate here after all. So I voted for him in 2016, and I've been pleasantly surprised. You knew something was going to happen before November because Joe Biden wasn't going to be able to beat Donald Trump. Head up. I don't know. I'm not a conspiracy theorist in this regard. I don't think this thing was planned or anything like that. However, everyone tries to exploit it to their own best interest. As Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're seeing just happen today with the crisis and the bailout package they're discussing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's where we are, and it's an unusual time. I have a friend who's your age, and he said to me, Jack, I've never seen anything like this. I said, I've been around a lot longer than you have, and I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah.
No one has ever seen anything like this. And, for our sake as a country, I hope it is. No, I don't hope it's horrible. But I would feel better about us as a nation if it were more horrible than I think it is. If it would have to be much more horrible than I think it is. But I'm a skeptic. So,
do you mean that in the sense that it would kind of bring people together because there's such suffering going on and we could find more commonality? Or why do you think that it would be, without being grim, a way to be better?
Let me just give you an example. I was just thinking about this yesterday, and this now I get to use my age. It seemed like someone who was, if not wise, at least someone who still remembers where he is.
Yeah.
We're in Kansas City today, right? Aren't we? Yeah, okay. No, I was thinking last night back to my grade school days, and I won the perfect attendance medal when I was finishing the 8th grade. We went through 8th grade, and the sister says, "Okay, is there anyone who's missed a day of school this year?" And then one little girl raised her hand. I said, "I didn't miss a day." I said, "I haven't missed a day since the 5th grade," and she said, "Well, basically," and I started thinking about this. How did I know it was the 5th grade? How did I know when I missed the last day of school? And I just looked it up just to verify, because I could have told you, when I was thinking about this, I knew roughly right off the top of my head.
Okay.
It was October 1957. And I was sidelined with what I remembered as the Asian flu. So I Googled, just yesterday, I hadn't heard anyone talking about this. I Googled 1957 Asian flu. You could do this, anyone listening could do this right now. And it turns out we had 70,000 deaths in a nation that was half the size that it is today.
This was in the United States in 57.
70,000 American deaths in a nation with half the population.
Okay.
And why do I remember it was in October 1957? Because I was a Dodger fan, and I hated the Yankees. I lived in metropolitan New York, and although the Dodgers didn't make the World Series that year, the Yankees did. I was rooting against them. The Milwaukee Braves were playing against the Yankees. I had the good fortune of being sick during the World Series because it was broadcast and only during the daytime, right? The game was only on in the daytime. So, all the teachers were suspicious, of any kid who was missing
during their city's World Series.
Right, during the World Series. So but I remember, and here's something else I remember. And this is 5th grade. I didn't miss another day for the next 4 years. I had a 104-degree temperature. I remember this because we bragged among ourselves about who had the highest temperature.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So I wasn't the only kid who had it. I mean, Asian flu ran rampantly among children, right? I had a 104-degree temperature. Other kids, I'd meet someone with 103, 103. I have 104, I didn't hear anyone who beat me that lived. You get 105 or so, you really get in trouble. And I traced it back, and I'm looking at 70,000 deaths. Let's project that forward to this population. It's 140,000 deaths.
Yeah.
Does anyone really think we're going to get anywhere close to that?
They're saying that we will.
I don't believe it.
Do you know Dan Bongino?
Yes.
He's got his Bongino report that's
Right.
kind of changing and supposed to replace Drudge. Let's see, because I was looking this morning. Now, some people say that we're not there because we don't have the tests. We don't have enough tests to go around. Tests,
Tests
everybody
will tell
says.
you how many people have it.
Yeah.
But the deaths are being counted.
The deaths is what you're focusing
We're
on.
talking by 1957 standards, we would have to have 140,000 deaths today.
Okay.
And I will tell you that in 1957, well, they played the World Series. I can tell you that for sure. Right during the middle of this,
Yeah, it says right now 46,000 people in the U.S.
have it.
Yeah, correct. Have not died. And I think we're at like 100 or so deaths, give or take 100, maybe 200.
I don't know. I mean, no, actually, there was more than that. It was probably now about.
Okay, more than that.
It was 285 last week, probably about 400 or 500 now. Do you know anyone who has coronavirus?
Actually, I was about to ask you that. I'm so glad you asked me. I don't know anybody with it. Do you know anybody with it?
I don't know anyone with it. I don't know anyone who knows anyone with it.
Now, they're saying we have people here and there. Pete Mundo this morning had a caller who called in and said there's somebody in Kansas City. Okay, maybe like 10 people have tested, and I'm right there with you, though, Jack. It seems like if this was but do you know what's also strange is that like all the celebrities are getting it.
Like who? Harvey Weinstein?
Yeah, Harvey Weinstein. How did he get it?
Yeah. He's like the Rock Hudson of
How did he get
coronavirus. Here's another funny thing. I'm not odd thing, but you know what I have not seen is the headline, and you would have seen it had it been true. Minorities hit hardest by coronavirus.
That's a good point. It hasn't chosen its preferred discriminatory class yet.
So I looked up yesterday, went online, I said, coronavirus by race. I couldn't find anything. And what I find instead, stop spreading this stupid rumor that blacks are immune to coronavirus. I'm not spreading it. I'm just trying to get a handle on this.
Yeah.
And then they were, of course, these articles would scold you in advance for daring to think that there might be a disparity in the way different races are affected by different things. And they would say there is no difference in any health. Some of them would go out and say there's no difference in anything. Mm-hmm. How about sickle cell anemia?
Yeah, right.
How about Tay-Sachs disease, which affects Jews disproportionately?
Okay.
Of course, there are differences. Or if blacks are unduly affected, like say by high blood pressure, we hear about that. Mm-hmm. So I was talking to a black friend of mine this morning, and I asked her about that, and she goes, "Well, we're asking that because we're not seeing it, among her friends and people she goes to church."
I did also see on Bloomberg News. I think it was just yesterday. It said where 90 or above 90% of people infected are all senior citizens. So again, it doesn't seem. I don't know. I think, and I mentioned to you on the way up, tomorrow I have my good friend who's at the Mayo Clinic, a virus researcher. He's going to come on and break down some of the science. And I want to actually get on to it goes really well into that book that you mentioned earlier. Before I do that, though, come full circle, how do you think this would help the country best if it were bad, if it were a bad issue?
We would not feel so stupid about how we've responded. We would feel like, yes, we did the right thing. We acted intelligently.
It was justified.
Acted precautious, preemptively. If at the end of the day, there are, let's say, 10,000 deaths, and and when it sounds heartless. People want you to think you're being heartless when you say this, but to what we've done to the economy, and we'll continue to do, is that we will make it much more difficult in the future to improve our healthcare system and to do medical research, because we're just not going to have the money.
One good thing that this is why I'm running for this position. This is why I was inspired by President Trump. When, a lot of people have been comparing this to Obama's reaction on H1N1. Was that swine flu? Was that
same
swine
thing. Right.
Yeah, right. So I don't remember because it just kind of like what everybody's saying. Nobody really made it a big deal.
Right.
But there's this article here. List of 74 actions taken by Trump to fight virus and bolster economy. I am so impressed by how over the last 4 weeks he's pulled the insurance companies into the plant. What's that? Do you know what that room is? That long rectangle room you always see photos and videos?
Is that the map room?
I don't know. That room, everybody can think it in there.
Right.
He pulled insurance companies in there. He pulled leaders of healthcare companies. He's pulled in all different industry leaders, and he's gotten so much of the private sector to put America first, to stop putting, I don't know if you want to say not put profits first, but hey, We're in a time of need. Come on, we need to help each other.
Right.
And I don't remember Obama ever doing anything. Obama was the guy who'd always say, "You didn't build that."
Yeah, right.
So I wonder if if he would have been like, "No, you guys didn't. But we don't want your help. You guys." But like, you look at government response, travel restrictions, expanding test accessibility. My favorite one here is one, informing the public. I like that he's doing his own live streams every day, just like Twitter. He's not waiting for the mainstream news to record it and twist it and then send it to the people.
No, right. I think he's handled it pretty well, and he's in a difficult situation because he's surrounded by people. And this, we'll get to my point in a second. My article today in American Thinker, like Reflections on a Century of Junk Science, who, as the saying goes, if you're a carpenter, everything you see is wood.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not a hoax. It's real, but it may be a mania. We may have moved from, let's face it, we've been under assault for the last 30 years by bad climate science, and science is politicized heavily.
It's been very politicized for sure.
Anthony Fauci, who went to my high school, by the way, the head of the NIH, was a big Hillary fan. He was his email showed up in the feed
no kidding.
The WikiLeaks feed.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's talk about that. So first off, American Thinker. You guys at home, if you don't know about American Thinker, if you haven't come across it, I don't even know how I came across it. I came across it maybe 2-3 years ago, and I was just very refreshed at how simple it is.
Yeah.
And it's how many words are your articles typically? Maybe
I
like
try to keep them under 1,000.
Okay, 1,000 or less.
I mean, this one's about 1,200, but
yeah,
that's max.
I'll just it's a 5-minute, 10-minute read.
Yeah, right.
It's not much, and a lot of these people put some really just. When you put it that short, you don't have time to fluff it like you'll see sometimes.
Yeah, right,
it's just very, very to the point, so I can really appreciate it. So check it out. American Thinker have some really good writers. They've been. How would you classify what style of outlet American Thinker is?
I would say it's an online journal. I discovered them 2009, or no, 2008. I can tell you very specifically, October 6th, my first article. Mm-hmm. And this is just reflecting back, but I had stumbled. I write books, and I also ghostwrite.
Okay, yeah.
Collaborate. A lot of ghostwriting is just heavy editing, depending on the author. I've probably done 20 books with people, most of whom you are much more famous than I am.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I have an eye for that sort of thing. And the first time I picked up Barack Obama's book, Dreams from My Father, I picked it up in the summer of 2008, and I was reading it, and I said, "No, he didn't write this book."
You could tell. Okay.
It's too good.
Okay.
Because I'd seen other stuff he'd written. And
really?
I'd heard him speak, and the language was not his. And I said, "Why?" I'm just curious. I said, John McCain had a book out at the same time, but it said John McCain with Mark Salter. We knew no politician, no non-writer writes his own book.
I agree.
So I said, I just wondered, but it was odd about Obama's book. I'm thinking he wrote this, before he was even a state senator. So I said, who helped him? I figured it must be some left-wing poet in, Chicago. So obviously. I just started Googling around, trying to find little clues, just trying to matching words and doing word searches. I wasn't making much headway. And then I dropped that subject. And then I started researching Bill Ayers on another track, the unrepentant terrorist.
Yeah.
And I picked up his book, Fugitive Days, his memoir, to see whether he and Obama had met each other before, had crossed paths before Chicago. And I'm about a third of the way into the Fugitive Days. I said, bingo.
You just recognized it.
I said, then I started checking the style, doing some, stylistic kind of analyses, where there's some testing you can do. It's imperfect. It's like a polygraph equivalent of science. And then I started, I started speculating at WorldNet Daily, short pieces, and then I heard from other people who had the same suspicions, and they started sending me parallels, And then by early October, this is now a month before the election, I had enough information to write an incredibly damning article accusing Bill Ayers of having heavily, I never said he wrote it, but being heavily involved in the writing of Dreams from My Father.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the way I did with other books. You doctor them. You get the raw manuscript and but a good ghostwriter disappears. A
Right.
vain ghostwriter wants to impose his own style, which is what Ayers essentially did. That's when I went looking for a place to put my article. I needed words, though. I needed space because I had to comparing words, comparing sentences, comparing analyses, the 53 matching nautical metaphors.
Yeah.
I need space to do this. And I got turned down, even though I wrote for some of these major publications like National Review, Weekly Standard, etc. They all turned me down. And then someone said, you ought to try American Thinker. Because they could give me the top article and they could give me space. And I did. And then Rush Limbaugh picked up on it. And then your life kind of changes, when Limbaugh starts talking about you.
I did not know that. I knew, we've talked about it, I knew Andrew Breitbart referenced you.
Yes.
And he was a fan of you, which is, that's a huge compliment in my opinion. I didn't know Rush picked it up also, though.
Yeah, and in fact, I saw Breitbart shortly before he died. And it was odd. I saw him at CPAC, and he was just standing there all by himself. I mean, by that time, he was a rock star, on the right. And I walked up to him, and I'd only met him once before or something. And I said, Andrew, I just want to thank you for standing up for me. Because what happens if you criticize Obama, you're a racist.
Oh, absolutely.
And if and at that time, they had made Obama out to be the genius of all geniuses, the literary genius. I mean, they made him out to be a literary genius. Right now, he's struggling to write his own memoirs because he knows that people are scrutinizing it, like they weren't doing in '95 or 2008.
Yeah, or 2008.
Because if they had picked up my thesis, David Remnick, who's an Obama biographer, New Yorker editor, liberal, scam artist, in his book, and he says if enough people, if my claims were true or enough people believed it to be true, it would have been the end of his candidacy. I knew that. And yet I got no help from the responsible conservative media. Zero. No, I got, other than Andy McCarthy at National Review, who then had his hand smacked for daring to come to my defense. Same thing with Rush. They won't even look at the evidence.
Wow. Yeah, that's very frustrating.
And that's what the kind of environment you're walking into today, because there is, especially in something like the whole coronavirus phenomenon, I noticed the caution with which people approach this in the responsible conservative media, including Fox News. They've got to be cautious.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'm sure you already know what all of the others are saying, but actually, you know what? We don't need to see what. I'm more curious about this article that you wrote. Now, let me check just real quick. I want to make sure the audio sounds fine. Perfect. Okay, so you wrote this morning, Reflections on a Century of Junk Science. So aside from your skepticism of corona, what are some of the examples of junk science in America in the past that's led you to this point that you're so skeptical right now?
I'm inherently skeptical for that reason. In fact, I just read a book, a very good book. It's by a liberal. It's called The Guarded Gate. It's about the history of eugenics in the United States.
Yes.
And he makes the point, it was a bold point for someone of the left to make, that it was a progressive science, that it was run from the academies and from the lofty progressive, ivory towers of, or is it Ivy Towers?
Ivy Tower? Is it Ivy Towers?
I think it's one or the other.
Okay, either. I know what you meant,
I'll
though.
leave it at that.
Yeah.
And it was pure science. I mean, it was the science of the day.
Yeah.
And when you read it, it makes you cringe today. It was so bad. Some of the things they would say they're almost comical. They're so outrageous. And
Jack, how have people become so? A stereotype of the left is that God is dead, religion is What am I trying? It's cultish, right? It's not real. It's nonsense. But how has science become so religious on the left now to where you can't question science? Like, for example, you're not allowed to question the science behind coronavirus or the science behind climate change.
Yeah.
But you've seen very clearly how people are now questioning the science behind just human biology. What's a man? What's a woman? Where do they belong? Who is what? You're older than me. You're more experienced. You know your stuff. How did we get to this point where science has become the religion of the left? And
it really started 150 years ago with Charles Darwin.
Okay.
It soon became, without any evidence, as someone once said, it made it perfectly respectable scientifically now to be an atheist. It was their get out of jail free card. It ennobled and emboldened the agnostics and the atheists in the world. And you're not allowed, you're not allowed to question Charles Darwin, even though there's still no evidence of what he theoretically proposed 150 years ago with minimal evidence. It was a pretty clever theory, and it remains a clever theory. But I mean, that's how basic it is. That's when that started, and since that time, science has been frequently used to advance causes on the left, and and some of them have had deadly consequences. And I talk in here about the whole DDT phenomenon of the 60s, which was launched by one woman who was in fact dying of cancer when she started writing the book, Rachel Carson, and wrote this hugely influential book, Silent Spring, and which led to the banning of DDT by essentially all the Western countries.
Yeah.
The only problem was that DDT was enormously effective, and it was saving millions of lives in the third world because of its effect on malaria patients and others. In fact, it was used. It was one guy. The guy in my book. The book is called Hoodwinked. I focus on the people who went against the grain, and there's always been people who've gone against the scientific grain, always at a price. And the fellow who did it so in this case was a guy named Gordon Edwards, who was a entomologist, someone who was interested in, I believe that's the word, insect science and stuff.
Okay.
He had been in a war in World War II. His guys were coming down with some horrible disease, cholera or something, and DDT, I don't know, dysentery or whatever, but they powdered them all with DDT, and it solved the problem. And they said, my gosh, this is a wonder drug. So Gordon Edwards was first really excited by Rachel Carson's book when it came out, and then he started reading it, and he said, this is nonsense. This is crap she's writing. And so what he would do is if she was going to speak in a town, he would go have a counter speech, and he would start it by eating a tablespoon of DDT, And this guy was a leftist, an environmentalist, a scientist. He knew his stuff more than Rachel Carson did. But no one listened to him, and they banned DDT. Michael Crichton, who was an iconoclast, the author, he said it was the greatest scientific calamity of the 20th century.
I didn't know that.
The banning of DDT.
I always thought DDT was terrible.
Yeah, you did. When I was a kid, we ran behind it, and the trucks sprayed, and we all survived, Literally, the truck would come by, spraying DDT to kill mosquitoes or whatever.
Yeah.
And the kids would all run behind it, absorbing the DDT fumes.
Were you just having fun, or were you trying to get coated so you go out and play and not get bit by mosquitoes?
No, it was just fun to follow, it was kind of cool.
Okay.
And that's just like I say, when you were, when I had this Asian flu in 1957, they didn't stop the World Series for me.
Yeah. So yeah,
and then there was more, and then one of the most egregious of the scientific scares that they introduced was the whole population bomb.
Right.
And this is Paul Ehrlich in '68. He comes out with this book. He sells 3 million copies. He's on Johnny Carson 20 times.
Yeah.
He had everyone believing that within a decade there would be a massive famine and destruction of human life unless the Pope blessed abortion, unless we did these dramatic, draconian things. And just like the word, those are the words that Margaret Sanger used, founder of Planned Parenthood, to stop the spread of the defective races, the moron half of the American population, her words.
Yeah, absolutely.
We needed Spartan methods.
Yes.
And that's what we're seeing today, Spartan methods, draconian methods. Ehrlich was wildly off base. His predictions were embarrassing, and yet he's still winning environmental awards. He's still alive.
That's another thing that really confuses me, Jack, about the left. The science, the religion of science, but also just the straight up, either they don't know or they know and they just don't care. History.
Yeah.
It's like, again, the abortion topic is so dramatic, but more specifically, the Planned Parenthood topic is so dramatic and controversial. But you ask someone, you say, hey, do you know who founded Planned Parenthood? No, what's it matter? Well, because it was a white woman who wanted to euthanize black people.
Right.
Don't you think that's
An issue?
An issue?
Well, it's
Yeah.
certainly an issue if she were on our side.
Well, sure.
Well, she'd be like, she'd be, her statues would be removed, etc.
There was a guy online who tried to hold me guilty for the sins of my father when I said, yeah, I support America first. And the guy says, don't you know that was the motto of the founder of American Nazis? That's what they wanted. I was like,
No,
I don't know.
By the way, he doesn't know his history, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, it's people are very brave when they're on a keyboard and
right,
identify. But yeah, he says, well, I'll let you know that you basically are a Nazi because the American Nazi Party's founder was always promoting America first type stuff, which is that, and he's also twisting what a nationalist is or what it means to be proud for your.
Right.
So yeah, do you notice that also then? Do you notice that a lot of people just don't know or don't care about their history, especially Corona? When I say, you guys, at what cost are we going to try to fight this virus?
Right.
Because again, if you just kind of extrapolate the data economically and you look at history, you can see exactly what we should expect in the coming weeks and months.
Right. And you're right. And the responses are, even my friends on Facebook, for instance, the other day, and I've said, when we went into this shutdown order, I said, this is nuts. I said, there's been 4 deaths combined in Kansas and Missouri. And then one guy says, I hope you're number 5.
See?
I mean, and then someone else said, I hope someone sneezes on you. What I also found, and this surprised me, given what I think is just an incredible affront to our civil rights, what we're facing today, and not to mention the whole economic consequences of it, but people on the right aren't supportive.
Right.
I'm not. I mean, a lot of people are, but I get pushback that's like, this is the wrong cause, this is the wrong hill to die on, etc. Pete Mundo, I heard, was dissing me the other day for trying to plan a protest. I didn't listen, but I don't know if that's
okay,
true.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, but and because I wanted to have just a protest saying, hey,
somebody has to take the other side of this argument.
right, and but you're almost not allowed.
Well, you asked earlier, do you know anyone who has this? The follow-up to that, which I was going to ask you, is do you know anyone who supports this strong of lockdown, quarantine, pseudo martial law? And I know quite a few people who are saying, look, I'm willing to fight this for maybe 2 weeks, but there needs to be a much more clear plan. We can't
Do this forever.
Yeah, we can't do this forever. Again, at what cost?
What happens if it happens next year?
Well,
do it again?
Headline this morning is that it had already showed up in Hong Kong again.
Yeah.
Hong Kong had completely quarantined, went down, said it was clean, opened back up for letting people out of their homes, and is back in Hong Kong as of today. So,
yeah.
So I just don't know. At what cost are we?
Now, here's a question for you. I mean, you're
Yeah.
33 years old. I remember thinking, how time is compressed now. We're thinking just like, last week I went to a bar, now it seems like some distant memory. But the weekend before St. Patrick's Day, which would have been, mid-March, I was proud of you, the millennials, for going out drinking and carrying on, like usual, right? And not being intimidated into silence. Mm-hmm. Well, then, the next day, on 16th, they shut down all the bars. This is maybe you know this better than I, but I'm taken care of. I'm at the point where, whatever I'm going to achieve, I've largely achieved. Whatever I own, I'm going to own. I don't have any debts or whatever. But you guys are in the process of building your lives and your careers.
We're trying. Absolutely.
And you're going to face an enormous obstacle that you weren't anticipating. And I don't hear any pushback.
Is your question, where's the pushback?
From your basic, the millennials are by and large, of course, the most obnoxious age cohort since the baby boomers.
Don't forget, you guys raised us.
I know. We as a cohort, baby boomers are, and I am at that front edge, are terrible. We were obnoxious from the beginning, and we're still obnoxious. The Generation X's were kind of humble and unseen, but then the millennials came along, and the whole life was revolved around them. But I don't hear any pushback from young people.
That's a good point. And we just mentioned, I really haven't heard much pushback from anyone except for I'm willing to do this for about a week or two.
Yeah.
I was talking, being in politics, fundraising, right? That's the name of the game. So you talk to a lot of your friends, your families, your whoever. And
Right.
I hate calling them donors because they're not. They're friends, they're
Right,
family
sure,
members,
right.
Professional associates, or just like people who are on the cause. We're all friends here. everybody is saying, but basically what you and I have said is, well, this seems so confusing by what the media is putting out. I'm willing to do this for a week or two, but at what cost? But you're right. I haven't heard any outrageous protests. You know what? I don't think people have realized yet. So, and you probably know this stuff. They say that the average American, something like 80% of Americans can't afford $1,000 emergency. The average American has like $1,000, $2,000 in savings, that kind of stuff. Right now, you can't rent a 2-bedroom apartment anywhere in America on minimum wage with 2 earners, that kind of thing. I don't think we've been squeezed yet just enough. I don't think people realize just how bad it's getting. Because, again, like I mentioned earlier, you just kind of extrapolate this stuff out. Right now, the Federal Reserve over every night is lending the banks as much as they did back in 2008 at once, just to bail them out that one time. And they're doing that every night. The stock market in 3 weeks is down just about, or maybe even more now, or right around even with what 2008 happened, but that took a couple months. There's, every restaurant, I've got a guy here in town who's part of the Missouri Restaurant Association, says about 50% or so of Kansas Cityans work in the service industry. I don't think people have had that squeeze yet. And it's going to come very soon, in about a week to 3 weeks. If we continue, Kansas City's on quarantine for 30 days.
That's crazy.
Bills,
and what's going to happen at the end of 30 days?
Right. Bills don't stop coming in 30 days.
No.
So I don't know. You're right. Nobody's really protested though. Millennials, Gen Xers, Gen Zers. I'll tell you when people are going to start protesting is when this gets really weird on TikTok. This app called TikTok.
Yeah.
For those of you at home, well, I don't know if it'll open. TikTok, you got to check it out. This is where all of the what's the next Gen Z? Is that who's after millennial? The young kids?
Yeah.
They're all on there, and they do not care about anything. They make the funniest memes, and they joke. Nothing serious to them. I think when they start turning around and getting upset, it'll work its way up because they don't care who they offend. You should have seen the memes they were making when we bombed Soleimani or whatever his name was in Iran.
Right.
They were laughing their ass off and making all sorts of jokes at it. I think it's going to work its way up because they're kind of like our generation's comedians.
Yeah.
Where there's nothing's off limits. But I do think it's bizarre. No one's really protested. Also, very few people online, at least, are making a big stink about, hey, what kind of civil liberties are we giving up?
That is what's distressing. And I would say, based on my just Facebook page, and I don't unfriend real friends or relatives on Facebook, even though I just, in the real way, if I had my way, I'd probably, I get tired of them. But just as far as I can tell, everyone on the left is very pleased with there being, they'll scold you if you dissent.
Yes.
They'll wish you dead,
right.
in extreme cases.
And again, this goes back to that religion of science. Look, the man on the television said it's true.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
Shut up, Jack.
That's it.
The man on the television said it's true. You shut up.
Right.
Okay. This kind of plays into all of these little factors you're mentioning. I was on the phone yesterday with a guy. I mentioned it on Pete Mundo this morning. Very, very smart guy, very successful, very well respected in the community, and decades of successful work in finance and whatnot. And he knows this stuff very well. And he said, Ryan, this is surreal. And he was listening to everything we've been talking about. And he said, this doesn't feel like 2008. This doesn't feel like 1987 as far as economics and finance, stock market goes. He says, it feels like we're sitting here watching a controlled demolition where everybody knows the entire economy is imploding before our eyes globally.
Right.
Not
globally,
just the United,
right.
Every developed country in the world.
Yeah.
India yesterday went on full national lockdown. India. He says it feels like a controlled demolition. And I said, man, that is the best. I haven't heard anybody put it that way. But it feels very, very bizarre. We're all sitting here. No one's really panicking.
Because we have enough excess, right now that we could live off,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm an extra in a science fiction movie. From the moment this first started happening, when I started seeing those scenes out of Wuhan or whatever, I personally, I think it was that imagery that set the alarm so high.
Mm-hmm.
And it's aided and abetted by, and you're going to talk to scientists who can say, yeah, this is all legit, But when you talk to the fellow from Mayo Clinic, ask him if he expects 140,000 deaths. Okay. Because that's how many we would have had. By 57 standards, we would have had this year.
Mm-hmm.
And in 57, there was no economic impact. They didn't. I can tell you for sure they didn't shut down the World Series. For me, the moment of of almost no return came when they canceled the March Madness. They said, why do we need March Madness in basketball when we have real March Madness to fill the airwaves with, you know?
March Madness.
This is it.
Wouldn't that be a good way to describe what's going
I hope
on?
it's just March Madness.
Well, you know, and I remember that coming up. That was the first major thing that got canceled, I believe, if I remember right. And I remember there was a really good argument. Man, you have these kids. Again, at what cost are we protecting each other?
Right.
We have these kids who have busted their butt balancing university and sports for 3 or 4 years. They're seniors now. Let them play if they want to play. Let it be optional. Let no fans come in. Let them play just 2 teams if they want to. But don't shut the whole thing down and destroy their whole, especially if you can get 5-on-5 that are willing to play. Surely that's a good enough amount of social distancing.
Right, and young people are relatively immune to this. I mean, there's almost very, very few deaths, if any, among young people.
Right. I mean, there are starting to be some young people getting infected, but yeah.
But it's not like polio, which would scare the hell out of any responsible parent.
Right.
There was a polio epidemic in '52. I don't remember it, but I remember the after effects of it. You know, they introduced the vaccine immediately afterwards. People were just thrilled, you know, except for the kids who had to get their shots, which was really, you know, it was like a trauma for all of us. But on almost every block, there was some kid clanking around in, you know, braces and stuff. You know, its effect was, you know, one of my cousins died, an older cousin, and his younger brother was forever deformed by his parents because of the, you know, the effect of what happens when an older brother dies, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
I had a neighbor who was 2 years younger than me who had, you know, was in braces from the time he was 2 years old. You know, so you knew that. And his parents, you know, God, I'd been scared to death.
Yeah.
I'd have locked my kids down. But this isn't that. And, you know.
You know, here, let me kind of shift gears and keep in the same spot. This feels like, and I don't know about the pandemic piece of it, but like I mentioned, and I said this on Pete Mundo this morning, all it took was a 2-week, you know, everybody says, gosh, wouldn't it be amazing if the whole country could just have a month off of work and everybody gets to relax, right?
Yeah,
and have a vacation.
Right.
Here we have a month off of work and 80% of the private sector is facing bankruptcy. 80% of American citizens are facing bankruptcy in just under 4 weeks. And again, if the government, you know, we already know the government's damn near defaulting. In fact, just as of this morning, I don't know if you saw it, 1 month and 3 month treasuries went negative. So here we are. We're in negative interest rates at the moment with U.S. debt. This feels cultural. What happened to the days of responsibility where you know, Dave Ramsey, have 3 to 6 months of your emergency fund? Like, so many people don't have any so many companies, you know, on the stock market don't have an emergency. It's very much in the now, spend, live on credit, that kind of thing. And this, do you get that at all? Do you feel like there's a cultural thing here as well, where it's,
yeah, you know,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And we keep hearing about the people living on this edge. They're all expecting to be bailed out. I mean, that's part of the problem. They're all expecting someone to take care of them. I think young people expect their parents. And I've been saying this for a long time. I mean, I've written articles about this. I said, why are senior citizens getting discounts? We have all the money.
Good point.
You know, I don't. Our houses are paid for. Our cars are paid for. You know, we got money in the bank. I hope. You know?
Yeah.
I have insurance on my stock holdings. I don't know if that'll. I hope that holds. If the
Very
company,
nice.
Unless the country collapsed, I'm pretty good there. But and our kids know they could depend on us. Our children.
Mm-hmm.
But too many of our children and their children have become expectant that they'll be bailed out, you know, and that they haven't saved, and that they've spent too much, and that they've, you know, live on credit cards. And,
well, and I think this is also part of my campaign. One of my campaign staff yesterday, we were doing some things, and she was saying the three words that describe your campaign. I need them. What are they? Throw them out.
Right.
And I'm thinking the first one that comes to mind every time she asks is responsibility.
Right.
You know, Andrew Breitbart used to say, what is it? Culture is downstream from politics, or vice versa? Politics
is downstream from culture.
Okay, yeah. Right. And when I'm describing this thing of responsibility, look at our elected officials.
Yeah.
No responsibility.
Yeah.
They feel no sense of responsibility or duty for what their job is. And like we mentioned right now, can't we come together on this one issue? Surely this isn't a left versus right, but they're up there just screwing around, coming off of an extended vacation when America's going on a nationwide quarantine,
Right.
no economic movement, and then we start this nonsense of, well, let me see if I can get this pork. This is like a nasty, filthy, disgusting stuffed turkey on Thanksgiving,
Well,
and
you know,
nobody wants to touch it
I
right
think
now.
it was so bad. I mean, I had never seen this before on Twitter. I've stopped looking at social media as much as I used to read Twitter all the time. You know, I mean, as a consumer, I didn't post much, but there were trending were 4 negative articles about negative memes about Nancy Pelosi, which was if on Twitter, which is left dominated in terms of the way they allow things to trend. I said, oh my gosh, must have done something bad. Yeah, I fortunately I have a couple nice projects that I'm working on that doesn't change my life.
Okay.
Although you can't be unaware of the cultural collapse around you. Maybe there is some good that comes out of this at the end.
Well, I also want to, because this goes inside, this cultural question I have. This goes a lot to the book you just wrote. So we're going to do a free plug here. But The Hunt. And actually you wrote, let me see if I can find it on here quickly. This is actually when I realized that you were writing on American thinkers, when you wrote the article about, well, do you remember the name of that one?
It was about why your sons refuse to read.
Yes, absolutely. And I thought, God, that's such a well-written, here we go. And I'm not just trying to blow smoke at you. This was such a well-written article because it's one of those articles where immediately, you feel that inside of you where it's like, that guy just hit me right in the feels.
Right.
And it's true because you start listing some of these books. I'm like, thinking back to high school or college. I remember as a freshman in college, we had to read this multicultural nonsense book, your required freshman book, right?
Right.
But I remember when I was maybe middle school, late elementary school, the first book that really got me into reading was The Outsiders.
Right.
And that was
Right.
that was a good adventurous coming of age book for men, boys turning into men.
Even though it was written by a girl.
Well, I mean, whatever though. See, it didn't matter though. It was a good,
Right.
or Harry Potter to an extent. That was an exciting read for a kid. But you kind of say here why your sons refuse to read, the general overview, and those of you at home who are curious, take 10 minutes and read it. It's a pretty good, very tiny observation of a small part of our culture where. Why don't you describe what you're trying to illustrate?
Well, because with my co-author on the novel, The Hunt, Mike McMullen, and I wanted to write a book that young men would read. And that was part of our motive. And it's an action-adventure, political thriller set in Colorado. And, I brought Mike in on this project because even though I'm an Eagle Scout, but you're writing action-adventure for males today, you got to have everything perfect. You can't just, have half-assed, details. And Mike is a skilled outdoorsman. He has 2 sons. They're both in the Marines now. So Eagle Scout leader and all that stuff. In fact, I spoke at his son's honor court. So he knows about elk hunting in Colorado. What I know about is shooting airplanes out of the sky, since I wrote a book on that, TWA Flight 800.
Right.
And so we created a thriller set in Colorado in which a father and his 2 sons run into essentially a plot to kill the president. And what we wanted to show young men, or men and older men, is that virtue matters. There are things like honor and courage and persistence and endurance. And at the end of the day, these all come into play. If you want to do, acquit yourself well in the field of battle, or just acquit yourself well in life, faith, love, and you're fighting a group of people who have none of these virtues, that will help you prevail. And the book has been very well received. We've run into now a little marketing issue, but as you can imagine, just came out 2 months ago. But it is the young boys aren't getting that, and when I go through the reading list for recommended to boys and girls, for girls I suppose it's okay, but when 3/4 of the books are written by women, and then half of the other half are written by a quarter written by gays, and all of them are about social injustice or something, And when I started high school, and I went to an all-boys high school, so it was a little different, but we had a summer reading list. I read them all, and I still remember the books. You know, Mutiny on the Bounty, Men Against the Sea, Annapurna, Kon-Tiki, Call of the Wild, you know, Huckleberry Finn, books about young men coming or men coming of age, or a book about virtue. So that is where we are today, and you know, it's
aside from, where do you see that type of virtue or those life lessons being put out today, for say millennials and younger? Do you see any positive individuals or outlets or anything? What do you see?
You know, you really have to look hard. You know, so for instance, there's a lot of TV watching going on right now, let's face it. And thank God we live in an age with big TVs and Netflix and whatnot. But boy, it's the rare movie I see that I would recommend to young viewers, or the rare TV series.
I know. Have you noticed? I mean, you're a critic of Obama like myself, and he definitely has ulterior motives all the time, his whole professional career. Have you noticed that since, and I don't know, do you use Netflix?
Yes.
Have you noticed that since he and Michelle and who was the third one? Was it Susan Rice? They got put on that board of directors
I think so,
to create content.
Right.
All of the trending stuff is all just social justice, economic justice, multicultural diversity forced on you. And it's not that that's a bad thing. I don't care. It's that it's obvious.
It's obvious. And you have to look hard. You know, there are things looking around. I mean, today, for instance, what I've been doing is I've been recording a lot of Turner Classic Movies.
Oh, okay.
Which is my salvation, personally. So yesterday I saved A Tale of Two Cities, which is exactly the kind of thing that young boys should be reading.
Okay.
And watching or reading.
Okay.
It's a novel by Charles Dickens. It's about self-sacrifice. It's about courage. It's about virtue, you know. And when I watch these, you know, I'm particularly appalled by British crime TV shows. I don't know if you know this, but virtually all the lead roles now are played by females.
Okay.
And if they have a sidekick, it's a young man of color. Right.
Well, now, Jack, don't you know that you're sexist and racist for noticing that?
Oh, absolutely. Guilty as charged. I'm sorry. You know, but just you can't not notice it. I mean, my father was a cop. I mean, I'm sorry if I remember having this discussion. I'm digressing here, but I'm having this discussion. I was on Kansas City Week in Review with the fire chief and with the head of the Firemen's Union about women firefighters. But this is just indicative of where we are today as a culture. And they're saying women are just as good as firefighters as men.
Oh, they are? Okay.
And I said, listen, you know, my best friend's a fire chief in Newark, New Jersey. I've spent time in his firehouse. I know what those guys do. I talked to him about what you have to do to be a good fireman. And I said, I'm going to ask you this. You're on the fourth story of a four-floor wood frame walk up. A ladder comes up to you. Who do you want to see at the end of that ladder, Tony Gonzalez or Mayor Kay Barnes? That was the I issued at the time. And if you could tell me Mayor Kay Barnes, you know, I can tell you're absolutely not.
Well, okay, so it's
so you have to lie. That's the problem. We're forced to lie about a lot of things.
Yes.
And whether we're being forced to lie about coronavirus, I don't know yet.
Right.
But I'm suspicious.
That's a good way of putting it. Forced to not, you know, go against the grain. Part of what Pelosi was trying to stuff into this was required diversity training and required diversity boards at different Fortune 500 companies getting it. If you got a bailout, you're required to do an annual diversity audit and blah, blah, blah. It's like, what is going on? And then, you know, like, for example, we don't care, Jack. We don't care if women want to be firefighters, but like, I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, okay? And I love it. And it's a very rough and tumble thing.
Yeah.
And in my class, it's 95% men, 5% women.
Right.
Cool. I've rolled with the women before, and they're not weak. They're tough as nails. And like, if you give them an inch, they'll choke you out.
Right.
But like the left right now would force you to say, you are a terrible person because you don't have exactly 50% women and 50% men. Well, I'm sorry. Not 50% of the women in America want to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's different interests, different, you know, being raised, you know,
right. Except for the Kansas City Chiefs, we're going to give you a full exemption on that. So your firefighters who are critical to the health and well-being of your people, and it requires the same skills. Yeah. Strength, speed, stamina, you know. And there's 40 applicants for every opening. So let's face it, if it was just going to applicants, you could get the best, strongest, smartest people you wanted. Yeah. Kansas City Chiefs will give an exemption. And just think about this, Kansas City. This is what's sad today. 6 weeks ago, we had a parade downtown. That's how quickly our lives have changed.
That's a really good point. We were at a high 6
Right.
weeks ago.
6 weeks ago. What was it? February. I mean, maybe even less. I don't know. 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, right.
That's sad. I
That
mean,
is.
I wish we could just rewind this clock. You know.
I know.
I wish I keep wishing I'm going to wake up in the morning and say, God, you won't believe the dream I had last night, you know?
That's why this is so surreal. These are the things that Alex Jones, the conspiracy folks who are labeled conspiracy people, have been warning about.
Yeah.
We make fun of the preppers,
Yeah.
right? We make fun of the people who say there's a low-key police state being assembled.
Yeah.
People talking about the Constitution always being encroached. And here we are, and people are like, no, that day would never come. And it's like, oh, wait, we're here. Not only is it here, but like we're cheering it on.
Yeah, we're surrendering without a fight.
Right.
And that's scary.
Uh-huh.
Now, we're surrendering without a fight. And I think at someone in Washington, within a week, it's going to have to say, let's call this all off, you know? Let's take our lumps with the disease, you know?
Yeah.
But let's get back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Let's reopen the bars. Let's reopen the restaurants. Let's start flying places again. Reopen Disneyland. I don't know if it's open, probably closed. So let's stop being such total pansies.
Yeah, I do actually have a couple of. Now, you were saying earlier, you know, my generation, my social circle here in Kansas City, how are they reacting? Like I said, we're playing along right now, but I've already got a group chat going on with some people who were already planning a pent-up demand party. When all of this is done and the bars and restaurants open, we're going to try to put together, like, take responsibility and support your city. Let's get back out there. Let's get those service industry people some cash in their pocket. So kind of like a themed bar hop, maybe one drink or one appetizer at each bar, take Ubers all around, leave big tips everywhere, just get the money back out there.
It's a good idea to do nationwide. For instance, right after September 11th, which is the only event in my lifetime that compares. I remember the day well. I mean, who doesn't? But I had a guy replacing the electric motor on my old boiler in my basement when September 11th, when the events were taking place. And he said, you know, we can replace it, blah, blah. He said, you probably could use a new boiler, a new furnace altogether. I said, give me a new furnace. I got to get the economy started.
Yeah.
2 days later, I went out and bought a new car because I wanted to jumpstart there. I was afraid the whole economy would collapse, you know. I'm prepared to do that now.
Right.
I think your idea is excellent, and I think it needs to be done on an even larger scale. I want to start flying places.
Okay.
I was thinking just getting on. If I knew there was a place I could fly to where I could have a beer at a bar, I would fly there tomorrow. You know? I asked my friends in Colorado. I just talking to them. I said, "Hey, can I? Your bar's open?" Nah, sorry.
Not a single bar.
But you can still buy dope out there, you know. Those shops.
Or are those essential?
Yeah, you can still have an abortion too, by the way.
I did notice that was put in. Abortion clinics are considered essential.
Yeah, in New York State, and watching Cuomo up there saying, no life is disposable. Oh no? How about the 100,000 you kill every year in your abortion clinics?
I know. Again, that comes back to your point of how many people are sick or dead in America compared to all the different ways people get sick and die, or just die for that matter, in America.
In fact, I saw some number today that says every day 280,000 people will die worldwide, you know, on average. Okay, here's what I know. Mm-hmm. I'm going to die someday. We're all going to die someday, you know. I'd rather it be later than sooner, but you know, this could open a door for another larger discussion. But I think part of the problem, especially for young people who pride themselves on their agnosticism or atheism or their downright hostility to religion, to God, is that there's nothing after it for them. You know, nothing after life for them.
It's kind of a nihilistic way to live,
right? And that result is you fear death more. Because that's it, you know? Yeah,
I know. Yeah, I know what you mean. And, you know, that actually reminds me, we were talking earlier about role models in culture right now. Do you follow or do you know Jordan Peterson at all?
Sure, yeah.
I think he is a very wise guy. I think he's really the guy that we need right now.
Yeah.
Just literally out of nowhere, that he just got thrust onto the global stage simply by doing what you said.
Yeah.
Bucking the trend and saying, you know what, I'm not going to go along with this one. History has shown I'm not going along with this one.
Right. Or Douglas Murray in England has done much the same thing. You know?
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with Douglas Murray.
Katie Hopkins in England. I mean, there are people, you know, they quickly get denied a major stage, you know, when they start speaking out. But it is nonetheless.
Now, have you seen speaking of religion and all of this, have you seen Jordan Peterson's YouTube channel?
I have seen a lot of Jordan Peterson. I don't know if I've been on his YouTube
So
channel.
I'll show you here.
I know he's had some issues lately.
Oh, yeah, he really has. He's had some serious mental health situation. You know, I can't imagine being thrust onto the world stage, doing what he's been doing, and staying completely straight and narrow.
Right, sure, right.
He's got this right here, though. So when I first found out about him a couple of years ago, I started going through a lot of his stuff, and it was great. I loved it. And then I came across this one playlist called... Well, okay, it looks like he may have... Oh, no, right here. The Psychological Significance of the Bible. And it's just the Genesis stories right now. What is it, 17? And I was like, no, I'm not interested. Really not interested. I just don't want to be preached to. I'm just going to keep... But then one day I didn't have anything else to listen to, so I thought, you know what? I've got this long car ride wherever I was headed to. It's, 2 hours? Whatever, here we go. We'll give it a try. So I started off at number 5, Cain and Abel, the Hostile Brothers. And I was hooked immediately. I've never heard anyone describe the value of the Christian faith, the Western civilization way of life, as articulately and as reasonably as what Jordan Peterson does. And here's the craziest part about it, whether you agree with all of it, some of it, or none of it, he and I'll just show you a quick little thing here. We don't have to watch any of it, but you can see, he does these lectures in this lecture hall, right? A couple thousand people. All of these lectures, dead silence. You don't hear don't hear a door open and close. You could hear a needle drop. And he just for 60 minutes talks about the psychology of the flood and the importance of Noah and Noah's Ark. And so he kind of says, like, okay, was there a guy named Noah who had a religious spirit come down to him and tell him to build this gigantic ark and put 2 of each animal? I don't know, but here's what I can tell you is the psychological significance of why you should build an ark, why you should be prepared for the flood in your life, kind of like what we're talking about right now. There was, preparing for a rainy day, where there will be a day. In fact, this, as I start talking about this, it's the perfect story for what we're going through right now. He says something along the lines of, there will be a day in your life where a massive world-ending flood comes across you. It might be financial, it might be in your marriage, it might be in your family, it might be in your community. And you need to be strong enough and sound enough and mature enough to be the one that everyone goes to and everyone leans on when this comes to. And again, he just goes, and then he does a straight 60-minute uninterrupted just lecture on that topic. They're fascinating, and I couldn't stop, and so I just started consuming all of them. And he does an open 60-minute Q&A.
I have to check that out. I've been looking for books that will show me examples of how people live under duress. And 2 I would recommend, and one is I just finished reading Eric Metaxas's book Bonhoeffer, which is a huge bestseller. It's been out about 10 years.
What's that one called?
Bonhoeffer. It's about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who ends up dying in a German prison camp. He's a Christian martyr, brilliant guy, who didn't have to even be there because he had come to the United States. He could have stayed in the United States, went back. The other book I read, which was really very useful for this time and place, is Eric Larson's new book called The Splendid and the Vile. Eric Larson wrote Devil in the White City. He's a great author. Most people know him.
Okay.
It's about London during the Blitz, I'm so, and it's about the first year of the war in England, with focusing on Churchill. But a lot of it's done through memoirs and diaries and stuff. And here's Mary Churchill, 18-year-old daughter, going to a debutante ball. Bombs are falling in London, right?
Wow.
1,500 people will die that night. It's just not an unusual night in London. And so the ball comes off okay, and then they go to an after party. And the club they go to, it's just been bombed. So they say, "Oh, is another club open?" "Yeah, I know another one." So they go to another club.
You're kidding?
No. They were a more stoic people, a more stalwart people, and I think right now we're paying for our international, I should say, it's probably good that the whole world is doing it with us, immaturity, you know. And
Wow.
I hope we learn something useful out of this. I'm not sure we will.
Regardless of what happens, I think it'll be significant enough that generations, at least everyone alive today, won't forget what's happening.
They won't forget.
We hope they won't.
We hope they won't learn the right lesson anyhow. You know?
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of like these stories of history and the lessons to be learned, are you familiar, or do you listen to many podcasts?
No.
Okay, have you heard of this guy? So you probably haven't if you don't, but it's called Hardcore History, and it's with let me type his name in. Hardcore History. Dan Carlin. Do you know this guy, Dan Carlin? Dan Carlin he wasn't even like a professional historian. He just got his phone. He put a microphone on it,
Yeah.
and he's an amateur historian. He loves it. He reads dozens of books a month, all history related. So he started a podcast talking about. He's got this one. It's a 6-episode series, 32 hours in all, just on World War I.
Well,
And it's like, oh, you know how I told you earlier, you wrote that book about getting young men to read.
Yeah.
This was again one of those that hits you and you go, oh, that hurts to hear. 32 hours of just how disastrous and just terrible World War I was. We were just advanced enough with the Industrial Revolution to have these massively destructive weapons of war.
Right.
And our protection, we were walking into war with like wool uniforms, like Civil War style. And we were just dumb enough to use all of these weapons on each other. And
right. And so you have things like the first day of the Battle of the Somme.
Oh yeah,
60,000 British casualties on day one.
Yeah.
And yet, it's there was a different time, place, and people volunteered. I mean,
Yeah.
they were,
Well, and by the end of the first week, there were hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And he reads this account. He reads just how structured and how big the German army was. He recounts a story of a guy who was, because they didn't go straight to France, they went up through, I believe, was it Holland and down?
Right, Belgium. Yeah.
Belgium, yeah. There's a guy in Belgium who recounts for 24 hours there was nonstop troops walking by his little home. And he says for 24 hours, troops and tanks and trucks and horses and cannons were all being hauled down to the French front. And it's these history stories, man. We forget them, and you don't realize like just how, like, hey, World War I could have been avoided had they not just like jumped into this and just like there could have been diffused.
Yeah, right. And when you look back, you just say, oh gosh, it's so sad. And same thing with World War II. I mean, and Bonhoeffer was part of the conspiracy to kill Hitler. There were several efforts made before, and they never succeeded. One almost did at the very end. The one with the Valkyrie one. With von Stauffenberg. But it's very difficult because they had to plan in such a way that if they killed Hitler, they would take out the whole higher command because some of his henchmen were as bad as he was. But there was a huge resistance within Germany to Hitler. They just never succeeded in stopping it. And boy, and you just look back and say, why couldn't they stop that? Just like it's been the last 6 weeks. Why couldn't we just rewind this and go back?
Mm-hmm.
Let's rewind back to that parade down the street in Kansas City and say, okay, there's an illness coming. Some of us are going to be affected. Not a whole lot of us. We don't even, no one knows anyone who's been affected or will be affected.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Let's not panic, But we had a media that wanted panic for a variety of reasons. And we got it. And now let's see if hopefully we can learn something useful about it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm an optimist. I think everything works out and probably finally for the better.
Yeah.
It's just that there's victims along the way.
Yeah, I really do hope, like we had mentioned earlier, that we kind of put down our guns a little bit from the left to the right, politically speaking, and just like be Americans again.
And as a final note, I think I want you to tell people why you're running for Congress and why you're going to win.
Here's why I'm running for Congress, because there are people out there who, America is the greatest country that's ever happened to humans. There's a reason why, you've maybe heard of that book, The 5,000-Year Leap, that we went from, for 5,000 years, the fastest way of traveling was by horseback.
Right.
And then the U.S. was created, and now we're breaking the speed of sound. Now we're sending people to the moon, trying to Mars. It's the greatest country that ever came. And right now, there's plenty of blame to go around. We have allowed our government to become so big and unaccountable and just corrupt that at some point you have to stand up and walk towards the fire, like Andrew Breitbart said, and say,
toward the fire. Right.
walk toward the fire and say, no, this is wrong.
Yeah.
The endless spending, that's wrong. The endless wars and the having active troops in 138 out of 160 countries in the world, that's wrong.
Yeah.
The student loan thing, it's wrong. The universities, there's a lot that's wrong. And I really feel that if we could put these things like the Constitution said and the wisdom our founding fathers had of local control of these issues like education, of agriculture, of these types of things, we would have such a more engaged, educated, and prosperous community, state, country. But right now, I know for a fact that people around Kansas City and across the nation really are fed up. When we get done here, I'll show you this email.
Yeah.
This woman sent me an email. She donated $50. She said, Ryan, I just found out about you on Facebook. Lifelong moderate, voted Democrat many, many times. I can't do it. I can't in good conscience, what they're doing up there, vote for Democrat anymore. I read your issues, and you're American. You want to fight for America. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat.
Right.
This is for America. And she said, I want you to be my representative. I've donated to your campaign. And that's why I think people genuinely, this is going to be the one election year where it's not a Cleaver specific thing. It's about people who've made a career of politics, turned it into a career, not taking responsibility for what their job duty is. And I genuinely think this is how it's going to get flipped right now.
Your opponent, Emmanuel Cleaver, is exemplar of milking a system, of a fellow who started out probably with good motives as a preacher and a civil rights leader many years ago, and now he's still not paying his loans for car washes and and not only there's other issues I could talk about at length, especially his incredible race baiting in the 2010 Capitol Hill incident against the Tea Party.
Yeah, still haven't given that $100,000 donation to NCAA.
Yeah, right. That was appalling. I wrote about that. I made a little video about that, in fact. But it is a race that this year could be won because 2020 is a year in which anything can happen.
Hasn't this year? I don't know if you've seen the meme. There's a funny meme that says, the first thing says, me. 2020 is going to be my year. And then it says, me in March. We've got a plague. We have a depression and a global war about to start. And it's like, oh.
But otherwise...
2020 is going to be the year. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting. I mean, it's certainly be an interesting year, and,
no doubt.
And I'll be happy when it's 2021 and everything's back to normal,
Yeah, we'll see if we can't reset the clock for 2021.
Yeah.
But everybody, we've got about an hour and 12 minutes in, so we hit just what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
So you guys, thanks a bunch. I appreciate you watching, listening. You can contact me on Twitter, here on Facebook, in the comments on YouTube. Down below, you see right here, www.ryanderks.com. Keep in touch. We'll catch you later. But hey, thanks again, and Jack, thanks for swinging by. We'll do this again. Okay.
I appreciate it. We'll have to, and we'll maybe catch up and see if we've saved the world a week from now.
Okay, totally.
Thanks a lot, Ryan.
Bye, everybody.
And good luck with your campaign.
Mm-hmm.